Welcome to Beyond the Headlights,
where we turn our pain into purpose
and raise our voices against drunk driving.
I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Destiny. Today we have a special guest with us that we are so excited to share with you all. Can you tell us a little about yourself and who you are and kind of maybe why you're here?
Sure. My name is Zach. I am a police officer with a local agency who will remain nameless today for the podcast. I've been a police officer coming up on 7 years. During that time, I've been pretty interested from the get on traffic safety as a whole. I'm very proud to say that in my current agency, I am a certified DRE, a qualified phlebotomist, a traffic crash reconstructionist with several...
What's DRE?
Drug recognition expert.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, ma'am. So that's like if we were to look at DWI as a whole, there's people who can't do DWIs, so like pre-academy, and then coming out of the academy, we have DWI training that they've received through NHTSA, and then stepping forward, DREs like kind of king of the hill in the DWI world. It's
an all-encompassing statement. Like you can do all the things. Is that pretty much?
Yes, ma'am. So we're court. We still have to go to court and explain our expertise, if you will. However, we are specially trained to go through a 12-step process with someone who's suspected to be impaired by drugs, and at the end of that, we get to pick 7 drug categories: alcohol impairment or medical impairment or not impaired. So we kind of make that connection when you see somebody roadside or maybe someone that's impaired to the blood results. So it's kind of hard to make that connection, and that's what we're there to do. Gotcha. And then obviously to walk around and say that we're DREs is a great perk of that.
Definitely.
That's really cool. Yeah.
And so with each thing that you've done, there's an extra level of training,
yes,
extra
ma'am.
Specialty. So what made you choose to get all these extra? Is it certifications or what do you? Some
of that, I have to be very specific with the phlebotomist one. So we're not certified phlebotomists. That's a very big kind of thing in there.
Yeah.
Because certified phlebotomists work at hospitals. We are qualified law enforcement phlebotomists. So otherwise, it is certification training. So like DRE is a certification. Crash reconstructionist is a certification. Motor officer is a certification. So I do have to make that distinction for the program. That's a very big one for them.
Yeah. Important point.
Certainly. Okay. So I can remember back to being in, I think it was 6th or 7th grade. I was riding in a car with my girlfriend at the time, if you want to, a middle school. Yeah. And her and her mom were kind of arguing about her life path, which I kind of thought was early on for that. But they were in it to win it, each of them. And we were driving down the street, and she looks back at me in the car, and she goes, "Well, what are you going to do with your life?"
Oh my goodness.
And I never really grew out of like, hey, fire trucks and police cars are really cool.
Yes.
I saw a cop. I will never forget it. It was a local agency. It was a slick top, like no light bar, Crown Vic, and the cop was talking to the driver, and I'm like, I'm going to be a cop. And from that day forward, I just never. It just stayed there.
Yeah.
And then when I joined the Explorer program with a local agency, did that from 14 to 21.
Wow.
Yeah. And then went to the academy, and it just, the whole time I was like, yeah, it's cool to go help people and stuff, but like traffic seems like it just, I don't know what it was. It was like a fly to manure, and it just stuck. So
That's
it just grew.
Very cool. Your heart was in it, starting at a really young age, and it didn't sway from it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's certainly not the most popular or like sexy thing in law enforcement, right? Like the super fit SWAT guys that kick down doors. Like everybody's like, man, that's what I remember. My brother-in-law actually just got accepted into a K-9 program.
Oh.
So those are all like the. Man, that's so cool, and it's cool when I get to bring, I'm a motor officer as well, so like, I get to bring the motorcycle and kids see it and they're like, that's so cool, but when, I'm like, hey, I also take measurements on roadways for traffic crashes, they're like, neat
fun.
guy. Like,
We think that's the cool part, okay?
Yeah, but you're right. Kids don't get
They
drawn
don't
in
see
there.
that.
yeah.
Yeah, no.
But it just grew from there, and then every step that I took, I looked at the guys that were doing reconstruction, and I'm like, that's cool. Like, to look at something and be like, this is what happened. Like, just so nonchalantly, like,
You just
and
know.
here's your 32 pages of
And it's so
math.
detailed. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very, very detailed. Because
Well-
I had just got my documents back not long. Well, I've had them, but I requested them again.
Yeah.
And I was just shocked at, like, I thought it was a few pages. Because in the beginning, like, you're
Right.
clouded with, like, grief and fog and all the above. And they were, like, hundreds. And I was like, oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that's
30
exactly
plus,
what
like,
I
it was a
gonna
lot.
Say too. So just kind of a backstory about me. I never liked crime drama. I never liked any of it, like the investigative stuff. I think the most I ever paid attention to a case was like OJ.
Yeah.
We're so
And-
opposites
Right.
too, because like I grew up wanting to be Olivia Benson from Law and Order, and even though I'm in my 30s now, like I still want to be her when I grow up. Like
Yeah.
I will have made it in life.
But I taught preschool, and we had every year, every fall, we did the fire safety week, and we
Yeah.
always had law enforcement and police officers come by the building. And we also I kind of felt like I lived there, but we also, our center was right off the main road. So every time the sirens would kick on at the station down the street, the kids would run to the fence and wave to the law enforcement or to the fire department. And it was cool. Like you said, kids really love that. And I think because of all the negative publicity that officers get sometimes, it kind of like seems like it kind of goes up and down, or you support the blue or sometimes not. But it's great that you stayed consistent in your love for it. And still now, would you say that you still have that passion? Has it grown at all, diminished?
It has changed and developed, right? So prior to being a cop, I was like, man, red and blue lights and sirens are the coolest part of this job, like, or like just seeing the way people interacted with police and whatnot. And I was not employed prior to 2014, which is kind of the public opinion of when policing changed, if you will.
Yeah.
So seeing it go through that, and obviously priorities change, just like, I have a daughter, and when she was first born, right, the priority is, burping her, feeding her, and then now it's, well, hey, you have to say please and thank you, right? So she can feed herself to some degree, just in the same sense as doing that. The priorities have changed, and I've seen myself, especially at the agency I work at now, they have provided me an opportunity to grow into community education, which is not something that I ever initially, was into. And I was like, hey, the job's to write tickets, the job's to arrest drunks, the job is to recreate these crashes or go and handle 911 calls or whatever that is for that officer. And, looking at it and learning how important it was to go out and say, hey, we can stop this before I have to go out and do these things.
Yeah, and we have talked so much about the foundation of this podcast is like we would love. I think we always get shocked when people say they've listened, because it's something that we think about 24/7, and it apparently was Destiny's passion before it became her obsession, and it was my obsession after Grace died. But it is the levels of education that you go through and training that you go through, just like Destiny was saying with the crash reconstruction. It is fascinating the amount of it's not just the sirens and lights and bells and whistles, it's all the things that go on after that or before that. And so we are so thankful that you're here for that reason, because you tie right into what our goal is, and that's the education, and don't let this ever happen to your family.
Absolutely.
You don't want to respond to it.
Right. And it's certainly, obviously I do not share the same emotions that someone goes through, whether you're in the crash, know someone in the crash, or whatever that is, but it is certainly not something that I look forward to doing, but it is rewarding,
And just like, I'm sorry to interrupt,
no.
I was just going to say, we also talk about all the time how drunk driving you're not immune to it either.
Right.
You know, you're in more danger than we are because you're responding to those things. But it doesn't matter your skin color, your age, your social, economic status. Everybody
can be affected.
Yeah, it can be affected by drunk driving. So
Was there a specific moment in your career that shaped the way you approach these DUI cases? Like, was there something that drew you to it?
Nothing in particular. Like, I am extremely, extremely fortunate that in my life that I can remember, I've not been negatively affected in my personal life. My dad's cousin, his life was taken by an impaired driver, but it was not someone that I...
Didn't shatter your world.
Right. Yeah. I was very young. I did not know him very well. So it wasn't something that I can really say, you know, brings me a struggle. Obviously, I'm sad that his life was taken.
Sure.
But it wasn't something that really caused me any struggle. The attraction kind of came when I looked at it and was like, this is something not a lot of people do. You know, like it's cool to be on SWAT. It's cool to solve a murder, but there's nobody out doing this. And I would be lying to say that it's not sometimes fun to hear some of the things that I hear and see some of the things that I see, you know, in the more light-hearted ones, if you will, you know, flagging a car and hearing some of the interesting statements.
Is there any kind of story that you can tell us that wouldn't get you or them in trouble? Something humorous that might have happened during a field sobriety test or for a pullover? So
there's a few that I can think of. One in particular that just, looking back at it makes me laugh every time. You know, the person who was performing the field sobriety test laughed about it when I addressed it with him. Every officer on scene, everyone that was involved in the case, it's just amazing to see like what this guy processed in his mind, right? So the field sobriety tests are pretty standardized, right? So they're developed by NHTSA in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they are designed to detect drivers at a .08 BAC or higher.
And they're very specific, right?
They are.
You have to say the same sentence. You have to do the same thing with every single person.
They are almost to the point where you have to say them verbatim to make sure that they're valid, if you will. There is some leeway, but the better rap that you have to provide them, the better it goes for you in prosecution. So the three main tests that we go through are horizontal gaze, nystagmus, walk and turn, and one leg stand. And those are...
So the flashlight thingy, I'll say it in layman's terms. They like watch the finger.
Kind of like wiggling our fingers side to side. That's HGN.
The walk, step, turn, come back, step, stop, listen to directions, and then the other one is like hold your foot up off the ground.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yep.
She's basically certified in watching TikTok arrests, so she knows. She's a professional.
So this gentleman, he had been involved in a very minor traffic crash where his car was, the best way I can describe it, is teeter-tottering on a cable barrier on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he was not injured. No other vehicles were involved. No passengers in the vehicle. So I arrive on scene, and immediately every officer on scene looks at me and says, "This is yours."
Oh no!
So I'm like, okay.
Something good is coming.
And I'm like, all right. Like let's
up for the challenge.
Yeah. So we go through HGN. We have a little bit of trouble keeping up with the directions of following my finger and whatnot. We get to walk and turn, where there's an instructional phase and a walking phase. So I provide him very clear instructions. I'm very proud of my delivery of my field sobriety, and I'm like, do you understand? Yes, totally. So you're going to stand like this. You're going to take these steps. You're going to do these actions. And he goes, I got it. I got you. You're going to be proud of me. His words. I'm going to be proud of him. I'm like, okay. All right, man.
You're like, I instantly probably know.
And at this point, our instructional phase has two clues in it of impairment. And he has shown me both clues at this stage. So I'm like, all right, yeah, nope. Let's see how this goes. I said, do you understand the instructions? Yes, I do. Go ahead and begin. Instead of taking his next step, he separates his feet, drops his leg back, gets down in a runner's stance as if he was on a track. And I said, hold on, what are we doing? And he goes, you said to sprint to the other side of the parking lot. And I said, no, do not do that.
Well, then that would mean you'd have to chase him.
Right. And that was honestly my biggest concern, is I did not want to run after him. So I'm like, yeah, man, that's not the instruction. So we go through it again, and he goes, okay. And I tell him to begin the second time. He begins doing long leg lunges.
Okay.
Which I will say they were very impressive lunges. However, obviously not what I was seeking. When I did the the one leg stand with him, again, go through the instructions. Yes, I understand. If you're familiar with like the Russian guys who like squat down and kick, that was his one leg stand, which again, I was impressed with the physical abilities that he had.
Could you get back up?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it was just like,
down is great.
I'm like, I'm sober and my knees aren't good enough for that.
But that one in particular, I just it makes me laugh every time. It really does.
How do you handle that on scene? So you have to be, you're a professional.
Certainly.
So were you able to keep a straight face, or?
So while I do not agree with the choices that people make necessarily, I am to the belief that you get more bees with honey. Mm-hmm. So I do try to be as polite as I can, and keep my normal interaction energy. So I know that can sometimes be a little bit disheartening to people, right? No matter how serious my case is, the cooperation is always best, right? If we can get consent for a breath test or a blood draw, right? I mean, that's what we're after, right? We're after gathering evidence. That is my job as a police officer. So while I could go in there and say, you really messed up, man. Like you horrible horrible choices. Look at what you did.
It's going to cause them to shut down.
Exactly. And then, Mike, is it better to have that and let them know how I feel inside, or is it better to get the job done and gather as much evidence as I can to lead for an easier or better, tighter conviction? Sure. So it can sometimes be hard, right? Just like cases like what you guys went through, it is hard to be lighthearted in that situation, obviously, but that's kind of the best that I have found, and there's ones that you can't avoid, right? If they're physically aggressive with you, I can't be like, oh, come on, man, like, it's okay.
Let's be friends.
So
like talking to your toddler for real.
Yeah, and that's almost kind of what it comes down to is, obviously we all know people that get aggressive or angry, and, I'm always the worst person in the world when we're pulling in the jail, and I'm the one doing this to them, and, and you just say, okay.
Well, again, because I love the TikTok arrest, and I think, like, every time I watch them, I think, how many times do you have to say, calm down, or stop kicking me, or spitting? Like, you guys face some tough challenges, and I know that you have to go through giving everybody the benefit of the doubt and multiple instructions for doing things. But it does seem like that's the typical thing. The typical response is, why are you doing this to me?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough to hear, especially when
absolutely.
On situations that they didn't hurt somebody.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's different than the situations they have hurt somebody, and then why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
And through experience, if I had to give like an honest assessment, I'm probably over 300 arrests for DWI.
And you've been doing this for 6 years, you said?
7.
Coming into 7, yeah. So
that's awesome.
Wonderful.
Through that experience, obviously I've gone to court a few times and learned some hard lessons. But obviously dealing with the public in an intoxicated state, I've kind of been able to test and tune some of the stuff, so it's, hey man, I'm not the one who gave you the alcohol. I didn't put you in the car, or I did not make your choices for you. I just happen to be the consequence tonight. So
and you're alive.
Yeah.
Yippee!
Yeah.
You have a chance to change and not do this again.
Right.
Yeah.
But on the positive, I do get a lot of compliments that I'm sure have secondary meanings behind the compliments. But take
what you can get.
Exactly. I had a lady that she was yelling at me the whole time. She was super polite because she's like, I'm not impaired. And I'm like, okay, like,
Yeah.
sure you're not, you know.
She's not until she is.
You can't stand up, and we've showed most of the clues on all of our tests. So I take her into custody for DWI and take her down to the jail. And the whole time she's yelling at me about how wrong I am, and you know, you can't tow my car, you can't do this, you can't separate me from my property. And I'm like, okay. And so, you know, that develops as we get closer to the jail to worse and worse language. We're walking in, and I'm not going in there. Come on, like, either you and I can walk in together, or the jailers can come out and assist you. So as soon as we hit the jail door, it just changes, and she looks at me and she goes, "You have the most beautiful eyes." And I'm like, "Oh, thanks."
There is a heart in there.
And she's like, "So you can let me go now?"
That's
no.
what I was expecting.
Nope. Yep. And that's it's hilarious to hear, like, how horrible of a person I am until it's the last ditch effort, and then it's,
let's try this approach.
Yeah. Oh, I love your tattoos, or you're so strong, or wow, thank you. You know,
as if you've never been told a compliment. Right. It's just gonna work, and all the handcuffs are gonna fall to the ground.
You've been nice. I'll go ahead and like.
Right. You know, and or I know so and so, and great, I know so and so too, and
I bet that happens a lot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know Officer Zach, and I'm like, oh, really? You know, like, tell me about it. Oh, yeah, he works for this department, you know, this and that. We're pretty good buddies. You should call him. Oh, I'll keep that in mind, man.
You're like, he is me.
Right.
Hello. He says.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
How do you emotionally and professionally handle scenes that are involving fatalities or serious injuries? I know that those have to differ from just like your traditional impaired driving arrest.
So, I mean, emotionally, while it is hard, you try to kind of put that in the back of your head, right? Because, you know, especially when you're interviewing witnesses or family members or anyone involved, right? It's hard to get through the investigation if we're emotional.
Yeah.
And that includes sadness or anger or whatever that emotion is, right? That we have to kind of put that in the back of the head, remember, hey, I have a job to do, and at the end of this, right, I can go debrief this with my team, go over it, and that's always helpful. We have an awesome investigative crash team at our department, and I've actually worked one pretty recently where it is pretty tough to get through, and you know, there's a lot of mixed emotions in the case, and just having that opportunity to sit down in a closed room, go over the evidence, and hear what they think, you know, gives you that second perspective and a chance to be like, hey, this is hard, right? Like, this is
real
not
life.
Yeah, you know, but investigative wise, obviously we take them very seriously. You know, if it's a fatality, we automatically reconstruct it. So we'll come out and we'll do measurements, downloads of vehicles, extensive interviews, season evidence, pretty much anything that you can think of and more that you see on TV. When the impaired driver's involved, typically we'll activate a DRE to come out and evaluate the person and just make sure, is this just alcohol? Is this drug impairment or anything like that? Any surviving drivers we request blood from, so that we, even if, you know, let's say it is truly an accident, if you will. I hate using that word, but, you know, there's no obvious criminal negligence or something involved. We'll try to get that so that there's no question if this person was impaired.
And then that comes in handy if it goes to court. And then we did an interview. Well, we didn't interview them, but one of our podcasts was talking about the Goudreau brothers, the hockey brothers, and how the defense team tried to say that the brothers were intoxicated too on their bikes, and that contributed somehow to the crash. So I can see where taking all those samples, even if it looks like clear cut, can be a valuable piece of evidence if it comes down to the court and figuring out really who was at fault. And we've learned a lot, more things than we wanted to know about how things can get twisted.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But when you respond, if you respond, how do you, with all the things that you said, the DRE and the reconstruction, when do you step in at what role? If you are the first responder, do you do a different role?
So that's kind of a fluid thing for us. Our crash team is on call, DREs are on call, phlebotomists are on call. So if we're working and there is an obviously impaired person involved in the crash, one of the crash team members or a DRE, we're gonna address that immediately. Obviously, any drugs or alcohol in your body is going to be eliminated. It's a constant elimination.
Yeah.
So we want to get that wrapped up as quick as possible.
Sure.
So we'll get someone working that. And let's say I'm on duty and I respond to that crash and I see that, I'm probably going to assume that role right away.
Okay.
Because time is of the essence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and the unfortunate realization is this car is going to be here. People that can't be moved are going to be there, right? But this evidence is going away. So we need to jump on that right away. If it's something where I'm called out from home for a crash, typically I'm going to make sure that process has already began where, hey, do we have a DRE working?
Yeah.
Can we call a DRE? You know, who can appropriately handle this impaired driver while I get there? Because if I get there an hour later, this person might not be impaired.
So because it's so fluid, you could wear a different hat depending on the different whatever scene it is and how it's handled or when you're called into it.
Correct, yeah. So, and most of our crash team is cross-trained, if you will, or has multiple certifications. So we're very, very lucky to be provided those resources, you know, and we have guys that are really good at one thing. Like, you know, we have 2 guys on our team that are CDR analysts. So that's the black box in the car.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that existed until my crash, that there was a black box.
Yeah.
Me too. When we had to sign for them to retrieve it, which thought that was crazy. Like, take it. It's not our car anymore.
Right.
And then I had no idea that it was so specific. Like, they said that it wasn't just the stuff before the crash. It was way before the crash. Like, where she was, what she was doing.
That's crazy.
If she was hard stopping or any of those things. And then not just that, but then after, just hear for sounds. And movement.
So we can do a CDR download, which is pretty specific to like vehicle operation, braking, steering, yaw sensors. So that'd be like a rollover, or delta Vs, which is any sideways, forward, or back impacts into the vehicle. And then we can do a Burla download, which is the infotainment center system. So like the screen inside the car.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So when you link your phone to your car, we're able to retrieve all that data. Yeah.
And that's super because it shows if you're texting and driving.
Yeah.
It shows if you're like messing with your screen.
That's awesome.
So when you're driving, think about your music choice for when it gets downloaded.
Wow. Or your podcast.
Right. And you know, and then we'll go as far as, you know, seizing people's cell phones, and if we need to, writing search warrants for those. And technology is obviously very advanced. You know, we can see exactly what somebody was doing at any given second on that phone. So, you know, if you're like, oh, I wasn't on my phone, and then, oh, look at that, you're scrolling Facebook.
Yeah.
And we can see the difference between it being a background app, an active app, an interactive app.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. There's like no hiding with technology these days. There really isn't. And
you can't just text and then throw it in the passenger seat.
Like, no.
I didn't do it. I wasn't doing anything.
No. I know that you're certified in a lot of different things, but like, do you get any extra perks, or is it just like a passion?
So we have the availability to get on-call pay, which is, I don't want to say the word insignificant, right? I mean, any dollar matters in this world. But even if I were to do this and come out for these crashes for free, right? I mean, thankfully we don't work them every week.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm willing to do that. That's something that doesn't bother me. It's not, hey, I'm doing this because I get paid. I'm doing this.
It's a passion project.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why we want you here. You tie into our mission so many ways. We don't get paid for doing this either. We joked at the beginning that Every time we would say some specific word, it was like, hey, we're fishing for a sponsor. but we're not. We don't get paid for doing any of this. We don't get any perks other than feeling like we're trying to save lives. And so I know somebody told me at some point along the way that as discouraging sometimes as your job can be with like all the paperwork and all the extra stuff and sometimes the verbal and sometimes physical abuse that goes into doing what you do, the point is you get that person off the road for that night.
Right.
And that ripple effect can be enormous. You don't know how many people you saved that night, not to mention the driver themselves.
Certainly. Yeah. And obviously the stigma with police and DWIs, right? You know, oh, you're ruining my life, right? And, you know, I probably worked far more intoxicated single vehicle, single occupant crashes than I ever have where there's a victim involved, you know, where you walk up to a car and, you know, you're called out at 2 a.m. and they're like, hey, we have a fatality crash. Yeah. You get there and the car smells like weed, smells like alcohol, or, you know, you look in there and there's needles in the car, whatever that situation is, right? And it's like, you know, someone could have intervened, right? You know, whether that's us or somewhere someone could have prevented this life from being lost. I mean, obviously if it's going to happen, it's good that a person that made the bad choice is the only one involved in that choice. Definitely. But nonetheless, a human life being lost, you know.
And you lose that redemption story. And I'm always talking about a redemption story. Like, everybody makes mistakes. It's one of those things that, especially first offenders, like we've talked a lot, like what would be a good punishment for first offender, and we've talked about the interlock systems, and no matter what the BAC is, it keeps you in check so that there's not the second offense, at least right away.
Right.
I know that you wear a lot of different hats, but are you somebody who has to notify the family, like when a fatality takes place, and like how do you prepare for that? Like, you know what's coming essentially, and the news you're bringing.
Everyone is different, right? So I mean, obviously, if someone lives out of state, I don't have that opportunity to travel out of state and knock on that door, right? Because we want to make sure that families are notified in a reasonable amount of time, and it comes in person from a law enforcement officer.
So you call them
local
people.
Yeah. So and that's something that happens to every agency, right? I mean, obviously, we all service places where people live, so you know sometimes we'll get a notification from another agency, and that doesn't necessarily just narrow down to crashes, right? You know, hey, you know, Uncle Joe had a heart attack or whatever. Yeah. But it's particularly hard when you are the investigating officer, and you have to deliver that news. And
so you have had to make those.
Yes, ma'am.
Those knocks on the door.
And it's kind of 50-50. Most of the time when a police officer's at your door at 2 a.m, someone knows, right? Or they have a good suspicion that either someone has passed or someone is in trouble.
It's never a good thing. They're not coming to tell you you've won the lottery.
Right.
I know, right?
It's never a happy occasion. So do they train you for that?
There is training in the academy, and there's law enforcement training everywhere. So I'm sure there is a notification training out there. It's not something that I've attended. Just from doing it, it tends to be easiest on the person and for us just to be blunt and say, are you related to so-and-so? Yeah. They've been involved in a motor vehicle crash and they're dead. And that just, you know, dancing around it for them just increases anxiety.
Well,
because they're already lying to themselves anyway when they hear that. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to accept that. Like, you want to think, no, you're wrong. So, like, I think being blunt is sadly, like, what you need, you know? Like,
I do remember, so, like, it's such a choppy memory for me. And I do remember seeing him at the door and my husband inviting him in. I remember him saying her name, asking if we knew her. And I think he might have even said, like, do you know where she was? Like, just to pinpoint. And so once we said those things, and he knew that he had the right house, the right people. I don't remember much of the rest. But But I have thought about how tricky that must be, because I remember him telling me he had a 23-year-old daughter too. And when we have talked before, saying that, you saying that you had a child of your own and how different that makes your brain work.
Yeah.
I think that anytime you relate to the person that you're there to deliver the news to, it takes it to a more personal level for you.
It certainly does, and it can be hard, right? I mean, just obviously we don't want to do it at the doorstep. So just to get in someone's house at 2 a.m, right?
Yeah.
I mean that's difficult, and they're immediately on edge of, why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here? And so just getting over that, and there's times where we're just not going to be able to relate. I mean, if I'm notifying someone that their husband has passed, and I'm not a 45-year-old married person right now, right? Like I am married, but my connection can only go so far, and it's someone that I've known for 45 seconds. And, you do that quick look around, like, okay, please be something in here that I can relate to you for, or whatever that is. And again, I've been thankful not to lose anyone, so it's hard to be like, oh yeah, my grandparents died of natural causes, right?
Yeah,
like they passed away and it was kind of expected, so it's hard to do that.
But on a human level, it hits you and you feel
right.
it.
Do you remember one of the times that you had to deliver that terrible news to somebody, and how did you handle that afterwards, moving on from that? Because once you deliver the news, it still doesn't just go away. There's so much, piling on.
I can remember making a notification that was not crash related to a mother about her child. He was of kind of teenage, kind of late, almost 20s, and he was involved in a very bad situation where his life was taken by another person. In delivering that, I very quickly found out that it was not the first child that this mother had lost in a very similar way. So she was very upset. She was inadvertently physically abusive, just kind of that banging on the table and just kind of giving her that minute. I remember walking out of her residence and talking to the other cop. I'm like, man, how do you deal with that? And the officer that was with me is no longer in law enforcement. And I, there's still times where we'll be like, do you remember that lady? I wonder how she's doing. And, and thinking about these two brothers who were killed in separate incidents, thinking about their brothers and sisters, and, or just what are the odds that this mother loses two children in separate incidences.
This similar way,
and that is a fear that I've had. I used to play this game where my husband was in a drunk driving crash when he was 17, and the driver was a multi-offender. He died on the scene, but my husband lived. His 2 passengers, they lived with some serious injuries. But I played this game in my head that I thought, well, almost like God doesn't give you more than you can handle, that whole thing.
Yeah.
So surely we would never have it. We've had our incident with drunk driving, so we're safe. And so after, obviously, now Grace is gone, so my whole game that I played is broke. And so I started worrying all the time. I mean, nothing is promised. So in that poor woman's situation, that was probably one of her fears too, especially if the boys were living a similar lifestyle that put them in those kind of positions. So yeah, that sucks, and that's nothing. I think that's just one of those PTSD things that anybody who's had a major crash or something gets scared. Did you ever have trouble driving?
Not really driving, but I do struggle because I've started a widows group because there was nothing for younger widows or really widows in general about 6 years ago now. And there's 4 other leaders as well, but it's just all ages, you know what I mean, come monthly. But the average age of a widow in the United States is 58 years old, and that is so young. So statistically proven, I will probably have to go through this again, and that's not obviously I don't want that.
Well,
so preparing and thinking and appreciating every moment,
Yeah, and I bet you appreciate that more than most because you've seen some stuff. you just keep that in your mind that every day is a gift.
My poor daughter doesn't know it, but I mean some of the rules and,
her even
and decisions,
being a girl is just gonna make it that much worse.
You know, just to go through and have the opportunity to be a part of people's lives, right? Yeah. And that's from the horrible of the horrible to the best of the best, right? Mm-hmm. Just getting to see, you know, like stuff you wouldn't think about. Like I've been in the basement of a McDonald's. Like I didn't even know
they had
exactly.
basements.
You know, and I think this one might have been particular to the place, but you know, it's you walk into some of these places and you're like, what? Like how did I end up in this place, right? Yeah. And obviously seeing a lot of cool stuff behind the scenes that I never thought I'd get to.
Sure.
But with the bad, you know, I've seen so many traffic crashes unfold the way they unfold, so many decisions, and it, you know, just we have a large driveway at my house, and, you know, she loves to play in the water out front. I'm like, nope, absolutely not. Like, 0 time out front. Sorry.
Yes, like, I'm like that too. I'm like, even if a delivery driver pulls in my driveway, like my kids are running in thinking they're about to get snatched. I'm like, but it does happen, and it has happened. And like, once you're like not naive to the real world anymore, like it's hard to look at it innocently. Like once you know what happens, you can't be blind to it anymore.
Do you feel like it gives you anxiety? Is that the right word, or just extra cautious?
I feel like you'd have to be calloused. You know, like a little, like stone cold a bit, but not cold. Like a switch, you know, like how we survive. Like, it's a switch.
I do find myself probably more callous than I should be in my personal life. I went through a critical incident at my current department where there was a officer-involved shooting in the incident. And I think back to where if I see someone that looks similar to the person that was involved, I immediately, like, I won't even know I'm doing it. Next thing I know, I have my kid picked up on the other side of my, like, putting my body between her and this person who has nothing to do with it. And I'm just like, and then I kind of snap back.
Yeah. But it is kind of weird that you mentioned that because, like, I mean, I haven't been in a situation like that, but I like to try to stay in control of, like, my surroundings. So, like, even if I go to the movies, I'm like, how am I going to get out of here? Like, if I go to the restaurant, like, I always want to see the door. Like, I just want to be in control as much as possible, like, since.
Well, we've talked a lot about how our situations have changed who we are. Like, we don't sometimes recognize ourselves. And I think that would be something that you would have to be mindful of, too, not to let it change who you are for the bad,
right?
In any situation with your daughter, with your job, or with anything, because it's surprising to me how much I've changed since. And we always refer to ourselves as the before and the after because it is so divisive. It wasn't like a gradual change. It was like and then the knock on the door happened.
Right.
Can you tell us what the difference between a DWI and a DUI? That might be a dumb question, but I hear it in different ways.
No, so it is not a dumb question. So I am also an instructor for DWI. So I teach anyone from brand new people that have never seen anything except for cops waving their finger on the side of the road as they pass, all the way up to people that are moving forward to recertify or retrain their DWI skills. So it's something that that word is not allowed in my classroom.
DUI is not?
Correct, yeah. So that driving under the influence is not a charge in Missouri unless a municipality or local government agency passes one that specifically says DUI. So DWI is an all-encompassing charge for any intoxicated-related driving.
Okay.
The
pot, medicine,
yes,
alcohol.
ma'am. Yep. So the only things that are listed in DWI, which is 577010 in Missouri law, is that you operate a motor vehicle in an intoxicated condition. That's the only two things we have to prove. So there's no mention in there of us physically observing you drive. There's nothing in there about alcohol particularly. There's nothing, if we can prove you were in operation and impaired, that's a DWI.
Mm-hmm. I heard a rumor that if you're sitting in your driver's seat and you have your keys in your hand.
No, in the ignition, I thought.
Is it in the ignition?
It counts, right?
Is it in your hand or ignition?
So there's no particular, it all kind of comes down to the situation. So
So I go stumbling along, visibly intoxicated, slurring my words, nearly falling down with my keys in my hand. I throw myself in the driver's seat and shut the door, and then pass out. I didn't start the car.
So if we can prove that that's what you did, it is not a DWI. So operation would be physical control of the vehicle. So if you're just sitting in it, that's not going to, and we've seen you stumble, like let's say from a bar, right? The obvious example, from the bar door to the car, and it's on camera, that happening, not a DWI. Now, if you start the engine, you are then in control of that vehicle. And I'm sure that we could make the argument, right? Sitting in the driver's seat with keys in your hand, we could make the argument.
Yeah.
Now, same situation, stopped in an intersection, unconscious, and maybe the car's turned off.
There somehow.
Yeah.
Correct. And obviously that takes a little bit more work. We'll have to go back and improve some operation there.
Yeah.
Because in all honesty, there's nothing that says, hey, I'm drunk, I can't drive anymore, pull you into the driver's seat, and I'm walking. Right? Yeah. So we want to make sure that we're arresting people appropriately.
Have you ever seen people try to switch seats?
I have.
You have?
I have. And it's hilarious. The one time in particular, this one just makes me laugh. So it was two juveniles in the car. I stopped them. They're doing the seat switch, and
as if it's probably not obvious.
Right. So and I have worked in an era of law enforcement where all but one patrol car that I've ever operated has LED lighting, emergency lights. Yeah. Those suckers are bright, right? So even if I don't have my forward-facing white lights on to illuminate the car, those lights light up the car. So I turn my lights on, they pull over. So I walked up to the passenger side and said, "Hey,"
to talk to the driver.
Yeah, and I started addressing the passenger. I need to see your driver's license, insurance, and whatnot. And they're like, "Oh, why me?" I'm like, "Oh, because you were just driving." And they're like, "Oh, sir, I'm in the passenger seat." And I go, "You weren't 45 seconds ago." And they're like, immediately the new driver goes, "Oh, you saw that?" And I go, come on, man. Like,
and now you're both in trouble.
Yeah, like you're my whole concentration as soon as I light the car up or turn my lights on. Yeah. Like as soon as I do that, I'm focused on you, right? I mean, obviously I'm paying attention to make sure an 18-wheeler doesn't hit us from behind.
Sure.
But I'm concentrated on you, right? Because in my head, I'm like, are you going to pull a gun? Do you have a knife?
Right.
Are we going to take off? What is happening, right? That's my whole interest. And so I'm like, yeah, I saw that, and congratulations, you're both drunk, and now you're operating the car.
Wait, the passenger was drunk too?
Yes.
And they did that switch?
Yes, because they weren't drunk.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So.
Interesting. We're all kind of stupid, aren't we? With what we think we can get away with.
And it's amazing to see, because that is not the first time that I've arrested two impaired drivers in one report, if you will. It's amazing how often you take someone into custody and they're like, for what? Like, what do you mean for what? Like, hey man, ignorance is not an excuse. Like, it is what it is.
Speaking of that, this isn't on our list of questions, but I've noticed a lot, especially younger people don't understand implied consent when they get their driver's license. So they think that they can just say, I'm not doing any of the tests. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Can you talk about
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. So to add to my introduction that has taken us the whole podcast for me to get through, I teach First Impact, which is through Think First of Missouri.
Awesome.
And we have a whole section in there that talks about implied consent. So if you or any listener were to take your Missouri driver's license out of your wallet, look right under your beautiful picture, you should have a signature under there. When you sign for that at the DMV, you are creating a contract with the state because driving is a privilege. It is not a God-given right. Yep. So by signing for that,
need to know that.
yes, and because there's a lot of consequences involved with signing for that license.
Yes.
So in that, you are agreeing to follow all the rules of the road, state, local, wherever you're at. You're also agreeing to Missouri applied consent law. And what that is if a law enforcement officer comes into contact with you while you're operating a vehicle and we believe that you're impaired, we can request up to 2 chemical samples from you. There's breath, blood, urine, and saliva. urine is super nasty. No one wants to be involved in it. And it's very expensive to test. It's also kind of the lesser of the samples because it's excretion from the body, right? It's old. Saliva really isn't up to the task yet. Eventually it's going to get there. There is one instrument, the Sotaxa, that we can use roadside. It tests for, I think it's 5 or 7 particular substances.
Marijuana?
There is some, but marijuana is growing so quickly.
I was like, you have to be seeing more and more of that now that it's legal, because you don't think it's bad, but you're still impaired.
We just had this conversation with my husband's job because he will show up to a job site and smell it, and it is well, it's legal, so I totally can do this. But they don't take into account, drinking is actually legal too. You can do it. It doesn't mean you can do it and drive or do it and work or do it's become such a slippery slope for people.
Yes. And
your testing is not the same for marijuana. I mean, I know the field sobriety will show marijuana intoxication, but the saliva thing doesn't do that.
It can test for I think it's 1 or 2 particular I don't want to use the word strain. So there's different variants. They're called Delta variants, and if you can get Ryan Hutton on the podcast, this guy knows more about marijuana than anyone I've ever met in my life. I mean, he is honestly a scientist in law enforcement.
That's amazing.
So he can talk much more intelligently than I can. There is different variants and then obviously different strains of marijuana from there. So it can test for 1 or 2 of them, but we're missing a bunch of other stuff in the Sotaxa. But that's the Sotaxa is essentially a drug PBT. I think is the best way to kind of bring it down to a level. So it's just testing for those 7 categories. And I know one of them is methamphetamine and amphetamine. So it's kind of narrow. And they're great instruments. I love them.
But going back to what you said, the field sobriety will show intoxication. And that's enough because of the implied consent. You can still arrest somebody based off of that.
Correct.
And then you do other testing.
You do more in-depth stuff. So the 2 in the implied consent that I think are most important or most common is breath and blood. Blood is going to be the gold standard no matter what that substance is. It tests good for alcohol. It tests good for drugs.
Right.
Obviously, a breath instrument only tests for alcohol. So I don't want to say limiting what we're doing, but it only tests for one thing, so that's all we're going to get.
How do you get to choose which way you test?
That is one good thing about implied consent is it's the officer's discretion.
Oh, nice.
So, my personal opinions, I try to be as least invasive as I can, right? I mean, no one likes getting searched prior to getting in the car, right? So, but it's a necessary thing. No one likes getting a needle stuck in them, right? So if I'm confident in my skills that this is an alcohol impairment case, right? Because even if they blow a .24 and they're falling down, that matches up, right? If let's say they blow a .05 and they're falling down, right? Our breath sample and our impairment don't match, so then we're gonna move on to the blood. The only other kind of seal in the deal one would be is if it's a felony case and they refuse. We're getting a search warrant. We're taking that blood.
You're doing it anyway.
Would the felony case be a persistent
offender? So it could be based on priors or any injury or death case.
Okay.
Yeah, those are our felony cases.
Gotcha. Okay. Have you ever felt frustrated about the outcome of a case?
I have. Obviously, regardless of the reasons that you get into law enforcement, you want to catch bad guys and you want to see those bad guys face consequences for their actions. As a young cop, I would see so many, and I was much more heavily involved in the whole gamut of law enforcement. I'm very, very thankful to have worked at my old agency, and they gave me experiences that I don't think I would have gotten otherwise.
Right.
You think when you're young, you think you can change the world, and you've got these big ideas about how amazing you're going to be.
You haven't got knocked down yet.
Yes. And you hear all these old cops that are like, oh, you haven't been to court yet, you know, and you're going to change your mind about this or that. You know, you go into it and you're like, I'm going to make a positive impact. And, you know, you get knocked down a couple times, but I've kind of found the opposite in my career to where I feel like I see more potential of a positive impact than I did when I first started.
That's so hopeful.
It is.
You know?
Yeah. I think that's one of those clips that they should use to make a reel. We don't get any say in that, but
we will now. In your experience, what are the most effective ways to prevent impaired driving? What do you feel is going to make the change we need?
It's such a hard issue to address. And I know that you guys mentioned this, and it's something that I have found to be so true, right? You know, there's certain crimes that kind of fit into categories, right? And DWI is the biggest crime that expands every gamut of any survey, if you will, you know, whether it's based on age, race, sex, income, you know, physical locale. There's DWIs everywhere, right? There is agencies or jurisdictions that have maybe never seen a homicide or a murder, but they've seen a DWI.
Yeah.
You know, so it's easy to say, you know, oh, we have violence in this neighborhood, right? Send more police, right? Or, you know, we have this problem, we need this, you know, in DWI, it's something that, you know, anybody can go to the store and buy alcohol that's over 21, theoretically, right? You know, every sale should be over 21. And then you add in marijuana. You know, you can go to a dispensary and purchase marijuana.
Like every corner now, too, liquor stores and dispensaries.
There's drive-through marijuana dispensaries.
Yeah.
You know, like you're ordering KFC.
We have a drive-through liquor store in our town.
Yeah.
Well, Dirt Cheap is drive-through.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that, you know, and so it's something that all the elements of the crime are so readily available. You know, the impairing substances, even prescription medications. You know, and most of them say, don't operate heavy machinery. Well,
so many people turn a blind eye to that sticker on that bottle, though.
You know, and people think, oh, yeah, no, I'm not running a bulldozer this week. We're good.
Well, at a victim impact panel, I've heard people come up to me later and say, I was taking prescription medicine, but my doctor told me to take it. So I thought it was okay. I knew I would get sleepy, but I didn't realize I could hurt somebody. Yeah.
And you can trace it back to, I think people have a lack of understanding the power of their vehicle.
Yeah.
Right? You know, in our world as reconstructionists, the vehicle is the same as finding a gun on a murder scene. You know, it's the same thing, just a different weapon. You've taken a life, or you've injured someone and changed their life. Whatever that situation is, it's the same as a gun or a knife. You know, so even sober people forget, hey, I'm behind the wheel of a 60 mile an hour, 4,000 pound vehicle, right? That if a pedestrian walks in front of me, they don't have a chance.
I have to tell my toddlers that every time I'm in the car. Like, this is like, I can't be giving you stuff. Like, it's serious. Yeah, they don't like it.
Yeah, but I think teenagers especially, because they're getting that taste of freedom, and so speed for them is a huge deal. Like, they just test those limits for how fast they can go, not realizing, like you said, a dog could run out in front of them, a squirrel, a deer.
Well, we're such a busy, living in a busy world that everyone's rushing to get to point A to point B, and they're not slowing down, and they're so distracted, and I mean, it's bound to happen.
And in today's society, if you don't have a car, you're not successful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is hard to be a successful member of society without your own vehicle. So you have your vehicle readily accessible, you have the intoxicants readily accessible, and then you move on to, well, the stigma, right? I mean, it's just not strong enough for people to be like, oh, I'm going to leave my car at the bar tonight, right? well, I got to have my car at home. I have things to do
it's
tomorrow.
An inconvenience.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, we've spoke about this a few times, like even back on Valentine's Day, like I went out, but like we were Ubering and somebody was like, but I've only been drinking beer. It's only been a few. And I didn't really know them. They're like, we can drive you 1.5 miles. I'm like, no, like I don't drive with anything. But even after burying my family, like it still felt awkward. It still felt shameful to stand out there with just my husband by myself. And you can tell people not to do it, but at the end of the day, like there's only so much you can do. You know what I mean?
It's hard to change the culture.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And that
becomes acceptable and what doesn't.
And I think that is the answer to it is it has to be a cultural change, you know? I mean, and for me, I'm very, very fortunate that people kind of have the negative stigma of law enforcement and impaired driving has worked to my favor, right? Like when I go to family events, like there is so many people that are like, oh, do the tests on me, right?
That's
like
so awkward, isn't it?
Well, I enjoy it. I like, you know, I love getting up there and like, I'll, you know, especially the family members who are less than desirable to be around, you know, and I'm like, well, this is this science and you know, the case study from 1977 reveals that, and they're like, okay, you ruined it. Like, good. Like, I hope this is not fun for you.
It's not funny.
You know?
It's not fun. It's
we
real.
have the same effect. We are the downers. We're not the, what did Jen say? The fun police?
The fun police.
Yes.
Yeah. So at first it bothered me. Sometimes it still does bother me. But for the most part, it is not something I would have chose for myself. It is certainly not something I would have chose for my daughter. But I'll wear it because I'm sure like you feel the same way. Like, yeah, I'll totally be the bad guy.
Yeah.
The Debbie Downer.
It does not hurt my feelings at all. You know, and I think
get so used to it.
I think anybody that knows me, you know, is like, and like my mom, she tells people, she's like, I do not drive drunk because I know that if he stops me, he'll arrest me. And I really do feel that way. Like, you know, she has obviously other reasons not to drive drunk. But, you know, she tells that to people. And I've had family members that call me and they're like, hey, I got in trouble. I'm like, that sucks, man.
There's consequences.
Like, here, you know, good luck finding a lawyer. Like, I'm not helping you. I don't care. You know, you've made your bed and you have to lay in it. And, you know, to go to those events or whether it's friends or family, like, they all know, like, they get in that car, like Fun Zach is not going to be there anymore, and I'll pull him right out of the car off duty and be like, no, you're drunk, you're not driving, and if you try again, like it's cool. I know where you'll be sleeping tonight. I don't care.
No, and we love that. Like we would cheer. Like that's just so. It is so important, whether it's your family or your mom or just strangers. And I think that I really do. I don't want to underemphasize the fact that what you're doing is heroic. It is it is life-saving, life-changing, even if it ends up that the person's in jail because you've affected the outcome for that night, and that's huge.
And the ripple effect, it just keeps going. You know, like you don't know who you could have affected that night.
We didn't say this at the onset, but we are very, very thankful. Very thankful for what you do and what your fellow officers do. Well,
and when we first met, you know, I cannot stress enough how important this stuff is, right? You know,
side note, we met at a victim impact panel.
Yeah.
There was a person there that her behavior was questionable. She was nodding off. It wasn't a sleepy nod. It was like there was no startle reflex to her. She was just nodding off from the get-go. And so the moderator of the victim impact panel just sent him a text and asked if he was close. And so you got there, kept an eye on making sure she did not drive. She got into somebody else's car. So that nothing for you to do there.
Yes, thankfully. I mean, obviously bad she came to the I didn't get close enough to definitively say she was impaired, but it was enough to be like,
I will say there was definitely 100% something wrong.
Oh, yes. Something was going on, you know, and there was just nothing that was able to be like, hey, you need an ambulance, or hey, you can't be at this place where this impact panel is impaired, you know, and I certainly
kind of the opposite of what we're going for here.
Yeah, and I certainly felt that it was disrespectful to come in that condition or whatever was going on.
We're pouring our hearts out, and it's not keeping you awake. That's super disrespectful.
You know, and like you said, thankfully she did not get behind the wheel. I would have loved to confront her and talk about some of the choices that she was making. However, obviously, as a police officer, we have to work in the criminal and not the, hey, you're making bad. My job is not to be a teacher, essentially, right? It's to educate through enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there are teachable moments. That was not one of them.
Right.
It was just a bad decision she was making. But she didn't drive. So
right.
Yay for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that you feel like, well, let me phrase it this way. My daughter's case, we've talked about this on the podcast before, and I've talked about it publicly, but there was nothing that could be done for the homeowners that had the party because Missouri doesn't have social host laws. Do you feel like that would be something, if it were passed in Missouri, because it is passed in like 30-something other states, could you see, and let me explain for people that aren't listening what that would mean, is that especially for minors, if the parents agree that there's a party at the house and somebody leaves and hurts themselves or somebody else, the parents, the homeowners, would be responsible for, I don't know, fines, maybe criminal charges. Do you think that would be something that would deter underage drinking especially?
I have two schools of thought. So, like, especially when we talk about impaired driving in juveniles, right? There's people who think, well, hey, they're not allowed to drink. They're not allowed to consume marijuana, so it shouldn't be an issue, right? I mean, that's not reality, right? Statistically speaking, it is not reality. Yeah. And when you look into that consumption, there's the two avenues, right? Mom and dad or someone who's 21 is providing this stuff, or we're obtaining it under some other illegal way, whether that's theft, fake IDs, whatever that is. Yeah. The deterrent, I do think, would be there, right? Any addition to the law provides deterrent, right? Just like us being out doing traffic stops at night, every person who's consumed alcohol is like, thank God that's not me this time, right?
Yeah.
And then hopefully that brings them, when I do field sobriety on the side of a roadway and an impaired driver drives by and says, oh, man, they're out doing this. And my hope is the next time they're like, old boy got it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be old boy.
I don't want to do that.
Right? So in the same way that the law works, right? Like, people know DWI is against the law.
Right.
And if that stops one person from getting behind the wheel, in my opinion, the law is a success. So I do think that it will help, especially the responsible people in the area. They're gonna look at that and be like, ooh, I never thought of that.
I don't want to be that homeowner
that
gets that charge.
And especially in cases like that where they become immediate public interest.
Yeah.
And then Fox 2 or News 5 is standing at your porch saying, this is the house where it happened, right? Like, nobody wants that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be in the spotlight like that.
Right.
So I think it would be effective. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that had to be figured out as far as the elements of the crime itself, and then it becomes a totally different thing to enforce a law, right?
Right. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Do your neighbors call the neighbors?
Right.
How does that all work?
Right. It.
I think ultimately what it comes down to is what I've said from day one, is that parents have to be parents and they have to ask their kids where they're going, who they're going with. Don't just take their word for it. Check their socials. Check their
be the parent.
60. Be a parent.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Hold them accountable.
Yeah, that's the easy answer. What gives you hope?
The positive interactions that I get, right, and so like when I first started in DWIs or reconstruction, like it's a very dim world, to constantly be seeing, someone who's falling down drunk, right? Like, it's like, what are you doing, man? Yeah. But once I got over the hump of seeing people prosecuted, of getting to talk to a family, provide them the worst news that they're probably ever going to get in their life, and then by the end of it, them being like, you've answered all our questions, you've given us closure, you've brought this person to justice, that kind of stuff really like re-energizes the drive, because there's cases where the evidence just doesn't support a conviction, right? And that's unfortunate. Or I know you guys have talked about the lawyer situations, right? I mean, there is really good lawyers out there, you know,
whose sole purpose is to get their defendant a not guilty outcome.
and I think credit should be given when credit is due. And I know this is going to sound weird coming from me. The really good DWI lawyers, while they can be looked at as a huge negative, there is a positive that I don't think people see. So right, I know this is very like,
I'm like, where is this going? I'm so ready.
So some of the hardest lessons that I've learned in enforcement through DWIs was in the courtroom, you know, and I can remember back, and I've talked to this fairly notable attorney several times. I'm not going to necessarily say we're friends. We don't go out together, but we respect each other, right? You know, like I understand that this is his career. This is his job. His job is to find errors and get people off. I can't hate the guy for doing his job, right? I may not think it's the most noble profession in the world, but right, I chose to be a law enforcement officer. There's people that do not like law enforcement officers, and there's people that think, oh, hey, there's good and bad there. There's good and bad in a defense attorney, right? Everyone should have the right to counsel. You know, and everyone should have a right to a trial. I know you guys talked about that in your last one. You know, there is a positive there, right? We live in an awesome society where people have rights even when they're suspected of a crime. But for me, I can think back, there's a few things that I put into every single DWI report, right? And every time I'm on the side of the road, I'm like, this time in court, when I got
getting me this time.
when I got you know, beat on the stand on this one particular thing, it made me a better cop. It made me a better DWI investigator, a better crash investigator. You know, every deposition you go to, every time you testify, it makes you better. So, you know, while many people think that the defense attorneys are a negative or a bad in the world, there is a positive, right? Because there is lessons that I've learned that I could have only learned through them, right? You know, every piece of my hard head where old DWI cops were like, you better do this. And I'm like,
it's
right,
fine,
buddy. And then I learned that lesson in a public courtroom where there's 100 cops sitting there watching you, and they're like,
told you.
Oh.
And I think we can relate, like on real estate contracts. Like, you don't realize you messed up until it cost you a fridge or a few grand. You know, you never forget that one though.
And you learn that lesson. You know, I mean, I can recall testifying in a particular case that's been settled now, and the defense attorney asked me what the 3 things this person could not do while we're observing them prior to a breath test. I came up with 2 of them. I could not come up with 3 of them. And since then, I will never, ever forget those 3 things. And I make sure that I do those 3 things during the observation period, and I make sure I document it in the report, you know, to the point where I have had defense attorneys tell me, you know, like, hey, man, this is a really solid investigation. Like, this is a great report, you know. So
and that's a pat on the back. Like, there's a respect there.
You know, and
I think ultimately, like, the bad things suck. You cannot get through life because we're all imperfect human beings. So there will be bad things that happen. And I know in your case, it's made you a better mom. What you've been through, I don't quite know what I'm better at yet because of this. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe finding the positive in the worst situations.
You have to find the silver lining, you know, and you got to find growth.
But you're right. Every bad thing that we go through is a growing experience, and it should make us better. Of course, it doesn't make everybody better, but it should. And so I think that's a very good point. So we're going to kind of wrap this up. We've taken a lot of your time, and we're so grateful again. I don't think we can thank you enough ever, and all the men and women that do your job, and across the board, all first responders. But talking about hope and change, and we're on the same page about creating this culture shift. And as a parent and preschool teacher for a long time, I know that change starts with our kids, and you have one of your own, and you have a heart for teaching. So I think, like, to sum it all up, what we've talked about, we just start planting those seeds with our kids, and over time, I think that it will end up, they will be the ones that change the world, not us, but what we've poured into the little ones. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, it's funny. My kid is very into Paw Patrol, right? Like the superhero dogs.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she got this line from that, but she kind of does this run, jump, and like throws her fist in the air, and she says, "I'm gonna make the world a better place."
Oh.
Which is very cute, and it's
true.
It is. It really is, and she talks about, she's obviously very into police and firemen.
Yes.
And we know that the police are a little bit better, but that's a lesson that we have to reiterate sometimes with her, right? Because we don't have as shiny as trucks and whatnot.
Right.
Because we're out working all the time and not at the station. However, I really do think that is true. She talks about like heroes and stuff, and I do my best to talk to her. She's fairly young, and say like, you can do that. I know a lot of parents are like, you can be president, you can do this, and I'm like, you really can make a positive impact, just like how smoking has died off, right? Significantly. Yeah. Drinking can die off, marijuana use can die off, and more importantly, this DUI problem, right? We have so many answers where we can use Ubers, Lyfts, planned rides, whatever that is, to the point it's like, at the end of the day, I think I'd rather have someone call the department and say, hey, I need a ride home, than them drive, right?
Has anybody ever done that?
I have not had anyone do that yet. I've
maybe we'll have to ask dispatch or something.
I have had people that have called for a sober ride, who has then, the sober ride has showed up not so sober. And then so they get to spend time together, because obviously we're not going to overlook that, right? Right. But I really do believe that, and she's too young to really comprehend what that means.
But you keep pouring that into her, no matter what.
It's the seeds, that you plant, and they start to see the environment that they grow up in, and it just raises more awareness, because I don't think I would have the conversations that I'm having with my kids now already if what had happened to me hadn't happened, but it's how they make sense of things, so.
Yeah. And you wanted to mention a disclaimer.
I do, yeah. So I just want to make it very clear that while I did not mention my last name or my department or my previous department, the opinions that I shared today are solely from myself. They are not necessarily shared by any government agency, my department, or others in the department. So I just wanted to make sure that was clearly separated.
Yes, well said.
Yes. Well, we have something exciting coming up, and it is going to be our documentary release. It will be on August 6th from 5 to 8 at the Darting Prairie Theater.
It's a Marcus Theater.
Marcus Theater, yep.
Off of Highway N.
Yeah, and by the time that you're hearing this, you should be able to already get tickets, and you will be seeing that we have a big school supplies drive. In my past, I have donated probably well over 500 plus filled backpacks. 2 years ago, I did a birthday party and bedding supply drive for Parker's birthday to raise awareness and giving back. It's just kind of been my thing.
Parker's birthday was yesterday as of this filming, and Grace's birthday is next Tuesday as of this filming. So it is very close together, and I know that Grace was a big giver-backer, so I think she would love to be part of this.
So yeah, just stay tuned for boxes around the community on where you could drop your school supplies or the P.O. box and snag your documentary tickets before they are all taken. And we would just love to invite you and your colleagues and your whole agency just to join us in making a difference.
Kids love the police, they love fire departments, and if we're going to change the world, we want the kids there. So if your department wants to come and bring all the flashy lights or some just some little giveaway stuff, we would love to have you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Until next time.
Thank you.
We hope today's episode brought you comfort, understanding, and a renewed sense of hope. If you found value in our conversation, please consider sharing this podcast with someone who might benefit from it.
Until next time, hold on to hope, honor the memories of those that you love, and take one step at a time toward healing. You're not alone on this path. Take care and be well.